Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to start a new chapter, Ruling the Countryside, from your history book. In this chapter, we are going to deal mainly with the problems faced in the countryside, how the British started with different kind of policies of taxing the peasants, weavers, and how that ultimately led to the increasing problem for the people in the countryside. Okay, this chapter mainly deals with certain programs and policies which are aimed at collecting more and more revenues from the farmers. So here we basically deal with the main event after the East India Company was offered Diwani by the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam. Now, after assuming the power as a Diwan, the company now could impose new taxes, could set up a new taxing regime, and as it had not, it has got the power of administering the financial autonomy. Under that, they had only worked only as traders. They were mainly concerned with increasing their revenue. They were least bothered about the assessment or a proper system through which a logical or a systematic way of tax collection could be possible. They were mainly concerned with their revenue increase. Now, grant of Diwani and financial powers. On 12th August 1765, the Mughal emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. As Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control. Now it had to think of administering the land and organizing its revenue sources. And this had to be done in a way that could yield enough revenue to meet the growing expenses of the company. A trading company had also to ensure that it could buy the products it needed and sell what it wanted. Now, East India Company, even after assuming the role of an administrator, it was behaving like a trader. And it after getting after it got the financial autonomy, means all the decisions, major decisions relating to collection of taxes and how much amount of tax to be levied and on what all commodities, on what all products or at what prices they should buy the products. All that will be, all decisions pertaining to these things will be decided by the company. Now, growth of revenue. The company had become the Diwan, but it still saw itself primarily as a trader. It wanted a large revenue income, but was unwilling to set up any regular system of assessment and collection. So they were not interested in setting up a system in which they could properly assess the amount of tax that has to be collected. Okay. The effort was to increase the revenue as much as it could and buy fine cotton and silk cloth cheaply as possible. Within 5 years, the value of goods bought by the company in Bengal doubled. Before 1865, the company had purchased goods in India by importing gold and silver from Britain. Now, the revenue collected in Bengal could finance the purchase of goods for export. So, the British were mainly concerned with the growth of revenue. They were least interested in setting up a regular system or a proper system for assessment and collection. Now, growth of problems for common people. As the British were mainly aiming at increasing the revenue that they would collect from the farmers, from the weavers, it increased enormous problems for the common people. Soon it was clear that the Bengal economy was facing a deep crisis. Artisans were deserting villages, they were leaving their villages, going to cities in search of jobs. They were being forced to sell their goods to the company at low prices. Right? As we understand that after assuming Diwali, they could decide at what price they could purchase the products, and the prices they paid for the products were very low. So the common people faced a lot of problems. Peasants were unable to pay the dues that were being demanded from them. Artisanal production was also going down, and agricultural cultivation showed signs of collapse. Then in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. About one third of the population was wiped out, was perished. Now, permanent settlement, they started with a permanent settlement because now the British thought that we have to increase the amount of tax. For that, the farmers have to be enabled to pay higher taxes or higher revenue. How could they be able to pay higher revenue? For that, the land had to be uh, improved, or agricultural conditions have to be improved. Only then the peasants, once they get a regular income, they will also be able to pay the company. So for that, a permanent settlement system was that came into being in 1793, and under the terms of this settlement, the Rajas and Talukdars were recognized as Jamindars. They were asked to collect rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. Why it was called a permanent settlement? Because the amount that was to be paid as revenue, as rent, which was to be paid to ultimately to the company via the Rajas and Talukdars, that amount was fixed. That had to be, that is not supposed to be increased in future, and it was felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue into the company's coffers, and at the same time encourage the zamindars to invest in improving the land. Since the revenue demand of the state would not be increased, the zamindar would benefit from increased production from the land. So zamindars were mainly concerned with their profits. They thought that the company has decided not to increase the rent amount. So even if the agricultural production rises, they are not supposed to pay increased amount of rent. Okay. So the zamindars, as I said, that they were mainly concerned with their own profit. So they were happy with collecting more and more profits for themselves, and they bothered least for improving the conditions of the land or improving the agricultural conditions, as they took it for granted that the rent would not be increased in future, because under the permanent settlement the rent would not be increased. Okay, even though the agricultural production rises, the rent would not be increased. But they forgot the very basic fact that if they don't do anything to improve the conditions, agricultural conditions, to improve the land, they would not be able to get higher productions. Okay. Cornwallis was the Governor General of India when the permanent settlement was introduced. The problem of permanent settlement. The biggest problem was that the amount that was fixed as rent was too high. Okay, so the peasants were unable to pay And the other problem was that the company officials also soon found out that the zamindars in fact not they were not investing in the improvement of land. Okay, the revenue that had been fixed so high that zamindars found it difficult to pay. Anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. Numerous zamindaris were sold off at auctions organized by the company. The prices in the market rose and cultivation slowly expanded. This meant an increase in the income of the zamindars, but no gain for the company, since it could not increase the revenue demand that had been fixed permanently. On the other hand, in the villages, the cultivator found the system extremely oppressive. The rent he paid to the zamindar was high, and his right on the land was also insecure. Anytime he could be removed. To pay the rent, actually, what the poor farmer would do, he would, since the produce was very low, because nothing was done to improve the conditions of land, so already agricultural production was going low. So, and thus they were unable to pay the rent to the rajas and talukdars who are now known as the zamindars. As such, what they did, to pay the rent, they had to borrow the money from the moneylenders, and moneylenders would give them the money at a very high rate of interest. So the poor peasant gets into debt trap, and his condition becomes more pathetic, right? And thus he doesn't find himself in a situation to pay the rent. And if he doesn't find himself able to pay the rent, then he is removed from the ownership of the land. Okay, the small amount of land also that he might be owning, he would be dispossessed of. Mahalwari system. Under this Mahalwari system, in the northwestern provinces of Bengal Presidency, most of this area is now in Uttar Pradesh. An Englishman called Holt Mackenzie devised this new system. And under this system, there would be proper inspection of land, measurement of fields, and recording the customs and rights of different groups. And the estimated revenue of each plot within a village, and village is called mahal, was added up to calculate the revenue that each village, each mahal had to pay. So this time, under this Mahalwari system, it was thought that instead of keeping the amount that has to be paid as rent fixed, why not we assess the why not the company assess the capacity of each village to pay the rent by inspecting the land, measuring the fields, and recording the customs and rights of different groups of people. This demand was to be revised periodically, means the amount that was fixed as a rent was not to remain fixed, right? It had to be revised periodically, it had to be changed, not permanently fixed. The charge of collecting the revenue and paying to the company was given to the village headman rather than the zamindar. This system came to be known as the Mahalwari system. Under the Munro system, in the British territories in the south, there was a similar move away from the idea of permanent settlement. The new system that was devised came to be known as a Reotwar or Reotwari, the Munro system. It was tried on a small scale by Captain Alexander Reed in some of the areas that were taken over by the company after the wars with Tipu Sultan. Subsequently, developed by Thomas Munro. See, in South India, basically there were not no zamindars. There were small farmers. Okay, so it is very important, and Munro was of the view that the countryside has to be saved. Means people have to the country economy, the rural economy has to be preserved. For that, the farmers need to be enabled to accrue their income, right? Their income should not be, there should not be any drying up of their incomes, that after they are left with no income sources, then they would have to go to cities, and if they go to cities, then the rural economy will be declining. Okay, that so here the small farmers, the peasants, who were called ryots, right, who had tilled the land for generations, their fields had to be carefully and separately surveyed before the revenue assessment was made. Means how much a ryot can pay, it would be decided only after a proper surveying and assessing separately, right. In Mahalwari system we have seen that the whole village was surveyed, right. Village wise survey used to be there. Now in this case, in Ryotwari system, individually the farmers capacity to pay the rent would be assessed. Means how much land the Ryot has, and how much he can produce from his land. According to that, the um, amount of rent has to be paid. Munro thought that the British should act as paternal father figures, protecting the riots under their charge. Thomas Munro was the governor of Madras from 1819 to 1826. Now, problems of excessive revenue demand. Within a few years after the new system were imposed, it was clear all was not well with them. Driven by the desire to increase the income from the land, revenue officials fixed too high a revenue demand. Peasants were unable to pay, riots fled the countryside, and villages became deserted in many regions. Optimistic officials had imagined that the new systems would transform the peasants into rich enterprising farmers, but this did not happen. So we have to understand one thing very seriously over here, that though there were efforts made to increase the income of the farmers, but hardly anything was gained. Means the farmers conditions became much more catastrophic, and the earlier system which was there, the permanent settlement system, under which the expectation of the company was there that the people who were given the responsibility of collecting taxes, they would do something to improve the conditions of the land, but this didn't happen. And under the Rayadwari system also, we've seen how the Thomas Munro had thought that individually we have to take care of the farmers, and according to his capacity of paying the taxes, the amount of tax has to be fixed, has to be decided, or has to be assessed. And we have also talked about the Mahalwari system, under which the rent that was there, that is supposed to be periodically revised. So British officials thought that improvement will be there, and their regular income will be ensured, because if the farmers are able to get regular income, they would be able to pay the revenue to the company, the rent to the company. And thus company, on the other hand, though there is no improvement in real sense of the farmers, but there has been a continuous demand of excessive revenue by the company. Crops for Europe. Now we have to understand that British, they were still working as traders, and they wanted farmers in the country to grow the commercial crops. Like we talk about the two most important crops, opium and indigo. Okay, so in different places we talk about the crops which they thought are most important. Only those have to be grown, like the sugar cane, which is in present day Uttar Pradesh, which was called United Provinces, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and Punjab, and rice in Madras. High demand of indigo was there. The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropics. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in Italy. European cloth manufacturers therefore had to depend on another plant called woad to make violet and blue dyes. Worried by the competition from indigo, woad producers in Europe pressurized their governments to ban the import of indigo. Cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye. Indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas the dye from the wood was pale and dull. You can understand the difference between the two cloth dyers. Indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas the dye that was produced from wood, which was grown, the plant which was grown in the temperate regions, it produced a pale and dull blue color. By the end of the 18th century, the demand for indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded dramatically, creating an enormous new demand for cloth dyes. Now, India is a major source of indigo because indigo is a plant which could be grown in tropical regions, the hot and humid regions. So, um, India could be the place where farmers could be asked to grow indigo. So, the farmers who were there in Bengal, they had been pressurized, they had been, um, they tried to convince the farmers to grow indigo. As the indigo trade grew, commercial agents and officials of the company began investing in indigo production. Over the years, many company officials left their job to look after their indigo business. Attracted by the prospect of high profits, numerous Scotsmen and Englishmen came to India and became planters. Those who had no money to produce indigo could get loans from the company and the banks that were coming up at the time. So they started with the system of advance system was introduced. Those farmers who were unwilling to pay or those who had no money to grow opium, they would be given advance money, and once they take the advance money, the farmer become bound to grow what crop the Britishers, the East India Company wanted. Okay, so they took advantage of the helplessness of the poor farmers. They were forced to grow opium. Opium was also one such crop. They were forced to grow indigo, right? So at a time, especially when farmers needed to grow rice to maintain their yearly stock, okay, yearly granary, but they were somehow uh, tricked to grow indigo. You can see the difference. The one is bright blue color, the other one is a light blue color. So Morris cotton print, late 19th century England. System of indigo cultivation. Niche cultivation. Within the system of niche cultivation, the planter produced indigo in lands that he directly controlled. He either bought the land or rented it from the zamindars and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborers. You can see the pictures here. Problem with the niche cultivation was that the planters found it difficult to expand the area under niche cultivation. So indigo, since it's a plantation farming, so it needed large areas. But under the niche cultivation, they could not expand the area. Indigo could be cultivated only on fertile lands. This is another reason. And these were all already densely populated. So there was little land left to grow indigo because most of the fertile lands were already populated and they were already being used. They attempted to lease in the around the indigo factory and evict the peasants from the area, but this always led to conflicts and tension. It was difficult to mobilize labor. They wanted the poor farmers to run away from their land, but often this resulted in clash. This cultivation on large scale also required many plows and blocks. One bigha of indigo cultivation required 2 plows. This meant that a planter with 1000 bighas would need 2000 plows. Investing on a purchase and maintenance of plow was a big problem. And it was around the same time when the farmers were busy with their rice cultivation work. So it was very difficult to find laborers at the same time, the number of plots that were required. Till the late 19th century, planters were therefore reluctant. They were unwilling to expand the area under niche cultivation. Less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under the system. The rest was under an alternative mode of cultivation, the Rayoti system. We have already discussed this. Blue rebellion was relating to how the farmers who did not want to grow the indigo, so they started refusing to pay the rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories armed with swords and spears, bows, arrows. Women turned up to fight with pots, pans, and kitchen implements. Those who worked for the planters were socially boycotted, and the Gomastas, agents of planters who came to collect rent, were also beaten up. So this was known as a Blue Rebellion. Those who were working as plantation workers, since they were going through oppressive system, right? They had to remain busy. They were supposed to work on the rice fields, whereas they were being asked to grow indigo. So at such a time, when as I said that they were supposed to take care of their rice fields, they were being forced to take care of indigo. So the other crop was there, that was opium. Since we are here discussing only indigo, so we are mainly concerned with the indigo. Right. In 1859, the Indigo riots felt that they had the support of local zamindars and village headmen in their rebellion against the planters. In many villages, headmen who had been forced to sign indigo contracts mobilized the indigo peasants and fought pitched battles with the Lathiels. Lathiels were those people, the muscular people, those who would roam with their lathis along with the Gomastas who would collect the rent. Right, British appointed agents were there who were called Gomastas, and along with the Gomastas there would be Lathiels, the people who would be carrying lathis in their hands, and if someone doesn't pay the rent, then that person would be beaten up. Okay, so these zamindars were also unhappy with the increasing power of the planters and angry at being forced by the planters to give them land on the long leases. The indigo peasants also imagined that the British government would support them in their struggle against the planters. After the revolt of 1857, the British government was particularly worried about the possibility of another popular rebellion. When the news of spread of simmering revolt in the Indigo district, the lieutenant governor toured the region in the winter of 1859. The riot saw the tour as a sign of government sympathy for their plight. The rebellion spread. Intellectuals from Calcutta rushed to Indigo districts. They wrote of the misery of riots, the tyranny of planters, and the horrors of Indigo system. Now they were worried with this rebellion. The government brought in the military to protect the planters from assault because the farmers became very violent. They started attacking the planters. So the government had to bring in the military to protect the planters, and set up Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of indigo production. The commission found the planters guilty and criticized them for being very coercive. Means they put a lot of pressure on the indigo cultivators. So they were criticized for this. It declared that the indigo production was not profitable for riots, right, for the farmers. It was not profitable. The commission asked the riots to fulfill their existing contracts. So whatever contracts they had signed in, they had to fulfill their remaining contracts, but also told them that they could refuse to produce indigo in future. So this was the result of intense revolt and protest rebellion that happened in the countryside when the farmers were being forced to grow indigo, but they realized that there is no point, there is no use growing indigo because they were supposed to work on the rice fields to ensure granary for the whole year, but since it had to be grown on the fertile lands also, and lot of problems the poor peasants had to face because already the rich fertile lands were occupied, right? So this is what we've been discussing so far, the problems faced by the farmers, the small peasants, and how the zamindars also got into their side, thinking that if these farmers are not getting regular supply of if they are not getting regular income, then their zamindari would also be threatened one day. So that's why they also give the support, and even women participated. So in this blue rebellion. Okay, I hope you have understood this. Thank you so much.